Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a brief discussion of the American political landscape, historically speaking. Contemporary issues, obviously, there's a lot of those, but now that I've moved in France, I spend actually quite a bit of time talking to people about the American political system. And one of the things that I was trying to explain, and that has become quite clear to me as I try to explain it, is relative to Europe, the United States has no left-wing party. Theoretically, the Democrats are the left-wing party, but functionally, in relative to any European political spectrum, they are not. The Democrats in most of Europe would be the center-right to right-wing party, and the Republicans would be just crazy. They would be the sort of lunatic fringe right in most countries. So it's just shocking, the different direction. But what this got me reflecting on is how and why this functions and why people don't recognize this, why we think that, there's these two parties that represent a political spectrum. There's no real political spectrum. It goes from center-right to far-right. That's the political spectrum in the United States, relatively speaking. And then people say, okay, why would I say this? Why would I articulate this? And I go, okay, well, let's take a look at the actual values and propositions concretely, rather than as rhetoric, but concretely, that you would associate with left-wing parties. And then let's look at what they actually do. So I just made a list very sort of quickly. So this isn't in any way absolutely comprehensive, but I want to make sure that, just kind of cover some key points, and I'm sure everyone will get the gist of this pretty quickly. So what would be those elements of spending and government regulation and priority and interest that you would say, okay, this would mark a left-wing party? One concerned with education, healthcare, cultural investment, public transportation, infrastructure investment that helps people get around, concern for workers, support for workers, unions, employment benefits, these kinds of things. Those core issues that are usually associated with left wing, whereas the right wing is usually associated with, nationalism and immigration and pro-business and, low taxes, those kinds of things. That's usually kind of the spectrum-ish that you would expect. However, there is no party of these things in the United States, which I know sounds crazy, but let's take a look at this. And so if we look at let's start with, healthcare. And this, I know, if you're in Europe, I swear this is how Obamacare in the United States works. But it'll give you an idea that there is no left wing in the United States. And if you're in the United States, understand that for the rest of the world, this just seems just obviously insane. And certainly not, if nothing else, it certainly doesn't seem like a left-wing program. So, it doesn't seem like this left, liberal, progressive program at all. So, first, it's important to note that Obamacare was, in fact, the structure of Obamacare, while it was passed by Obama, was in fact a Republican plan. So this was taken from Republican Party think tanks, Republican governors, and adopted at a national level by a Democratic president. But it was, in its inception and design, Republican. So it wasn't even a left-wing idea. It was a Republican response to the need to do something about health care. And so how this works in the United States, and again, I swear I'm not making this up for those of you not in the U.S., is you are mandated by law to buy insurance. You have to have health insurance. Either it's provided by your employer. If it's not provided by your employer, which is most people, then you're mandated by law to buy it. And you buy it through these healthcare exchanges, which is, a whole nother problem, but we'll just leave that aside. And then when you do that, you enter your income and your household income, and then it says, you are qualified for a subsidy from the government of X amount a month. Say you get $500 a month in subsidy from the government, and you have to pay $1,000 a month for your health care premium. Well, then you go and you look at all these different healthcare options, all these plans, of which there is an inordinate number of unbelievably complex plans, but you have to subscribe to one, and you have to do this every year. So you have to go through all of these possible plans, of which, I mean, there's just dozens to hundreds. And you have to select one, of course, based on price and all these other things. And then you will have healthcare coverage, and you will pay part of the premium, and the government will pay depending on your income. If you make a lot, then you just pay all the premium. If you don't make very much, then the government pays more of your premium. So which means, by the way, functionally what's happening is you are required by law to pay a bunch of money to the insurance companies. And either you're going to pay it or the government's going to pay it or some combination of paying it. So the government passed a law that said they have to give billions and billions and billions of dollars to health insurance companies every year. They have to by law. This is amazing. Now, the only many problems with this, obviously, but of course, the health insurance companies immediately game this system to get the maximum amount of money from the government, the maximum amount of money from the people who are paying for the health insurance, and then not provide the service. This is the magic of Obamacare. And so, by the way, this does not guarantee you access to a doctor. It doesn't guarantee you access to the medical care you need. It doesn't guarantee you access to the prescriptions drugs you need. And it doesn't guarantee that any of this will be paid for. Not only do you not have access, so you may not be able to find a doctor locally to take you. You have to pay for it, but you might not be able to find a doctor. You might not be able to find a specialist. You might not be able to get into a hospital, but you are paying for it. And when you do go, the insurance company may just say they won't pay for whatever treatment you got, and they won't pay all of it. They're always going to have deductions, and they only pay a percentage, and they pay a percentage up to a maximum amount. And so one of the most common reasons, I believe it is the most common reason to go bankrupt in the United States, is for medical bills. Even though you are required by law, and most people have health insurance, they still go bankrupt trying to pay for health care because either the insurance doesn't pay or it doesn't pay very much of it. And so our healthcare system, I mean, there's many, many problems with the healthcare system, but just its structure, its design, the Obamacare system, which was supposed to be the answer to some of these problems, is a system that requires people to have insurance, but does not guarantee them healthcare coverage. So, yeah, oh my gosh. So this is a plan designed by, written by, developed by health insurance and hospitals. This is who came up with this plan. And this is how it's rolled out. And so it's very good for them. It's not necessarily good for anybody else, but clearly it's not a left-wing plan. There's nothing left-wing about this. The money doesn't go to government institutions. The money it goes to private companies. It doesn't go to people. You don't give the money to people, you give it to private institutions. Yeah, so it's madness. And again, if I know that sounds crazy if you're not in the United States, but please look this up. This is how that system works. If you look at something like, say, education, boy, now we're really getting into it, higher education in particular. So higher education in the United States, wildly expensive. And the average college graduate has something like $40,000 in student loans. So what? Why is this system work? And we'll talk a lot about this because it's important to understand how this works. We'll talk about this kind of twice, now and then a little bit later. So you have this. So the idea was hey, we want to pay for college. We want more people to go to college because that's good for the economy. So, okay, a left-wing program would be, all right, we'll just pay for everybody to go to college. There you go. Nah, this is not what you do in the United States. The United States, you go, wow, the states who pay for most of this and the federal government who pays for some of it, they wanted to cut back on education spending, which they have. Per student enrolled, they've cut back their funding by 40 or 50% in the last I think 30 years, something like that, 25 years. So they have been reducing their spending, particularly per student, a lot, quite dramatically. And so you make up for that with student loans. And this is to say, hey, make the students, which is to say the people who have no money and who are trying to get an education to improve their lives, take out loans to pay for their education. Now, but notice what this means is, and so this means that you're actually going in further in debt. Like you're actually not just spending a bunch of time not earning money, which is kind of a loss, but you're also taking on actual concrete debt. And you go, okay, that's kind of crazy. And then people go, well, students will just graduate. They have no jobs. They have no income. They'll just declare bankruptcy. So yeah, they said, oh yeah, that's a hole in the system. Let's plug that by saying you cannot go bankrupt and clear your student loan debt. Every other kind of debt in the United States, you can go bankrupt and clear it. Like United Airlines has gone bankrupt like every other year they've gone bankrupt 4 or 5 times. They're just over and over again going to bankruptcy protection. That's fine. They can do that. Corporations can write off their debt. It's no worries. Let's just do that. But not students, because they realize like students don't have any money. And so if they have debt and no money, the intelligent thing to do would be to just default on it. But so we won't let them do that. So once you take this debt on, you can't ever get rid of it. It's really, really hard. It's functionally, it is possible. It's super hard. Like it's rare for people to be able to get out from under their student loan debt without paying it off. So you go, wow, that's a crazy system. But hey, they're going to get a job eventually. And, at least the money is there. And so they can improve their lives. And so a couple more things to add here. One, the other way they said, well, why would a bank ever loan to somebody who doesn't have any money? Oh, the government backs it. So student loans are backed by the American government. So companies can't lose money. Now, why wouldn't the government just loan directly? No, we'll have these companies loan the money, and then we'll back the companies so that they can't lose money, but then they manage these portfolios. So, okay, here's loans that students are guaranteed they have to pay back, and if they don't pay them back, the government has to pay for it. So you're like doubly protected on these loans. You cannot lose money. So the first thing they do is, let's say they loan you $10,000. Well, they charge you like a 3% fee for the loan. You're like, wait, what? You're giving a loan that's guaranteed. And they're going to charge you these really large fees on the originating the loan. And then they charge you way above prime interest rates. They charge you like double. So if prime is 2.5, they're charging like 6% interest. So here's a loan that is both guaranteed by law that they have to pay and backed by the federal government to pay. And you're charging high fees and you're charging exorbitant interest rates. Oh my gosh, this is madness. And then to put on top of that, if you graduate and you're like can't get a job or whatever, you get late fees, you get accumulated interest. They do all this stuff. So they just balloon on a lot of students. So it's not just that you graduate with this massive debt, but if you ever have a problem with this debt, boom, it's like the fees are there. They hit you with all these balloon payments, and it is bad news. So that's a good way to pay for education, it seems to me. So whatever, right? So, oh, by the way, and one more thing, and there's so many things, and I'll move on, I apologize. But it's the other thing is, of course, colleges immediately realize like, oh, these students have access to a lot of money all of a sudden. Like students who might have been able to access a few $1,000s now can access $100,000. Guess what happened to the price of college, right? Like just went through the roof, in part driven by the fact that your audience had access to this ready money. And then everything was just, it's all, hey, you can borrow $50,000. Why not borrow it? Now it's not an education. Now it's an investment. Well, it's an investment that you borrowed $40,000 to make. And there's no guarantee you're going to get paid back. Bank knows it's going to get paid. Colleges have already been paid. The one person who doesn't know they're going to get paid from this investment is you. Right? Like this is interesting system, but certainly not left-wing. Whatever else you can say about this system, this is not a left-wing system. By the way, so both Obamacare, which was again a Republican concept passed by Democratic Congress and president, and then the student loan system, this was dreamed up by Joe Biden, by the way. He was one of the key operators in this. So, again, then you go, okay, healthcare, education, those are some priorities that look a little bit sketchy, and we could go on and on about the education system in the United States, but let us just say there's nothing about it that is left-wing. Cultural spending. cultural investment. Okay, here you go. Your culture, the arts, history, literature, all this, that's going to be. So the U.S. government spends roughly for its National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, the two biggest programs, by the way, which may be eliminated, $360 million a year, which is about $7 million a state. Now, this is such a risibly tiny amount of money, by the way, of which about 20% is overhead, and of which a bunch of the other money goes to these programs that aren't really arts and humanities programs per se, but that's all right. Well, even if you count the whole number, which is just ridiculous. So, just to put it in perspective, France, which is a country with a quarter of the population and less GDP per capita, spends about $16 billion a year on arts and culture. So that $16 billion a year versus $360 million. So what is that? 10, 20, 30, 40, 40-fold more in absolute terms. If you adjust for population and GDP, it's like 100 times. The United States spends 1% of what a country like France does, or a country like Italy, by the way, or basically any other country in the world will spend more. In absolute terms, but once you adjust for population and GDP, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, you just think about that. I mean, it's embarrassing. There are small regional companies that spend way more than $7 million a year on advertising. In one state or maybe two states, whereas the United States government is spending $7 million per year per state. I mean, this is just crazy. It's like $1 a person a year. I mean, oh my goodness. So certainly not culture, National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts. So no, we're not going to do that. Transportation, like public transportation and low carbon I mean, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So this is where you get most transportation money is spent locally. Even the federal government gets a bunch of money and they then disperse it. So they're all federal programs, but it's almost all highway money. So you don't even think about the feds for this. But if you look at a state like Washington State, where I was from, on the left coast of America, as they call it, liberal state, had Democratic governors and Democratic House and Senate since, Democratic governors since the birth of life on Earth, and Democratic House and Senate much of the time, if not almost all of the time, but certainly lots of Democrats there. So liberal states on the liberal coast of America, their transportation budget is 95% not public transit, 5% public transportation. So you're one of the most liberal states in the liberal part of the United States, and it's spending 5% of its transportation budget on public transit, which is to say, yeah, we just don't care about public transportation, which is not a big revelation, by the way. No one should be shocked by that. But it just means that this notion of the left coast of the United States, not really. Washington State, also one of the most regressive tax states in the country, right? Democratic governors forever, Democratic House and Senate most of the time. What do you get? You get one of the most regressive, which means the poorer you are, the more taxes you pay, which seems like a good system. But whatever you think about that, it's certainly not liberal, right? This is not like people don't think of that as that's a super liberal program. By the way, speaking of which, Washington State also exempts taxes, many taxes, and the most common taxes on aerospace and software, which is to say, hello, Boeing and Microsoft. So again, like you can argue why that you would want these policies, and that's great. Let's have that debate about policy and structures and all that. But it's not left. It's not left wing. Whatever else you say about it. Then you think about workers and worker support. So the last time the federal minimum wage was raised was in 2009. And it was raised to a whopping $7.25. So in the, subsequent 16 years, it turns out there's been just a tiny bit of inflation, let us say, which means that the federal minimum wage, if you're earning that, you have been making less and less and less, and your earning potential has been seriously eroded. Functionally, you've been becoming poorer and poorer over time. And so, of course, you would think a left-wing government would step up and say, hey, let's support those people. Let's pass the federal minimum wage. Let's increase this, give these people a bump. Well, we've had, for the 16 years since then, there's been 12 years of Democratic presidents and 4 years of Republican presidents, and none of them have ever thought that this would be a good thing to do. So again, you can say that raising federal minimum wage is a terrible idea, that we shouldn't do it. But it's a very liberal idea. It's a very left-wing idea. Like, hey, let's give the poorest workers, those people at the bottom, let's give them a boost. And what would give them a big boost is if we pay them more when they work. That would be great. Why not? Just an interesting place to start, right? That seems very liberal, very left. It's not even a big deal. It's really not one of those things. It comes up occasionally, but there's never been a big fight about it. We don't care functionally as a government. And so you go, wow, if it's not, education, healthcare, culture, transportation, workers' rights and protections, and it goes on and on. By the way, not only is the federal minimum wage incredibly low, the federal minimum wage also doesn't cover a lot of categories of workers. So there's all kinds of workers that don't fall under the federal minimum wage, including like waiters and waitresses and these kinds of things. And so, it's farm labor, I believe, is exempted. Family labor is exempted. So so there's a lot of loopholes even in that. So where exactly would you go? And you go, the Democrats are the labor of union. They're the party of unions. Unions are left wing, and so there you go. No, unions in the United States don't work like unions other places. They never have. But starting with Carter, by the way, it was Carter who started undermining the power of unions, and the reason he was doing that in part was because they thought that a lot of inflation was being driven by the wages that unions were making for their workers. And so he said, we want to lower inflation, so let's, start cutting back on the power of unions. And so they started making the first efforts, the first decisions to really start to reel in unions. And then, of course, Reagan coming into office, and then Republicans really went for breaking the unions. And then the Democrats came back in, and they did something like pass NAFTA, which really was, functionally an anti-union bill of the first order. And so you go, they're not the party of unions. They're not a big backer of unions. They used to be. They were, way back when. But functionally, for the last, whatever that works out to be, 40 years, not so much. 50 years, not so much. And so when you look at workers' rights and protections, and you look at education, healthcare, culture, transportation, there's differences between the parties, but there's not a left-wing option on the table. There's not a liberal per se group arguing. That's not the spectrum of debate. The debate goes between center right and absolutely lunatic, right? That's kind of your lunatic right to center right. And you're like, wow, okay, there you go. But then people go, there's all these cultural debates and all this. And it's important to note, and I'll end on this note just because I think people have the idea here, but you do see a lot of debates, but they're almost all kabuki theater debates. They're all these shadow debates, as if something is being argued about. But when you actually look at what's being argued about, you realize there's nothing there. So again, right now, actually, it's a perfect example of this because the Trump administration is threatening to eliminate the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. And the Democrats are, quote unquote, liberal party is up in arms screaming that this is a terrible idea and this is going to defund, National Public Radio and, National Public Television and all these great programs are going to be defunded and woe is us. And that's a terrible barbarian thing to do. Except, as I mentioned, there is no funding there. There is no funding for arts and humanities. We just discussed this. So we spend roughly what would cost to get maybe 2, maybe 3 fighter jets, stealth, like the modern stealth fighter jets, F-35s, or whatever they call them these days. Yeah, it would roughly cover the entire National Endowment for Arts and Humanities budgets, a couple of fighter jets. So again, you can say what your priorities are, but when you're pretending like you're arguing about like, oh, it would be so terrible to eliminate these programs, and it's like, well, not really, because there's really no program there. Now, if we were spending $16 billion a year and they said we were going to eliminate these, then you'd be like, yeah, that would be real money. But again, $7 million per state is just, it's ridiculous, right? It's so small. It's ridiculous. And yet there's going to be this big debate about it. And so probably what will happen is some version will survive or not, but probably some version will survive. And then the next thing that'll happen is when there's a Democratic administration, they'll come in and they'll go, oh, we're going to restore this. And they'll put the funding back to where it was, which was nowhere. And these are the kind of debates that happen. Or if you look at something like education funding, and by the way, this is one of the things that drives some of the discontent and disharmony in the United States is these sorts of divisions, fake divisions as they are, but divisions, is they say, oh, okay, hey, we want to help fund, we're Democrats, we're liberals, we want to help fund education. Okay, great. Let's make college free for everyone. Ooh, no. We don't want to fund it that much. Okay, then what do you want to do? So what you do is you create programs like this, actual program, by the way. You say, all right, let's set aside money to pay for first generation Hispanic American students to go to college. So you go, okay, let's do the math on that. And what you find out is the math works out something like this. So this is, these are round numbers, but this is close-ish. There's about 20 million undergraduate students every year in the United States in higher education institutions. Of those, about 4-ish million, 5-ish million will be of Hispanic origin. Of those, about half, so say 1 point some million, say 2 million roughly, just make the math easy, will be first generation. So great. So what we do is you go from a situation where you say, hey, let's pay for 20 million students. You go, nope, that's a terrible idea. That would be expensive. And then you narrowcast it and you go, oh, we're going to give it to first generation Hispanic students. You go, great. Okay, so now we've cut down the amount of money we need from the number to cover 20 million down to 2 million. But we're not done yet. Then you say, one, you got to fill out all the paperwork on time and correctly. And we're going to make the paperwork tricky, which they do. These hurdles are not accidental. And so it turns out that of the students that could be eligible to receive this funding, more than half miss, way more than half. So let's say it's just half. So now we're down to 1 million students. So now we've cut out 95% of the students, and we've got it down to 5%. And then we put various parameters and restrictions and ways in which you can get the money and all that. And so, hey presto, we've reduced our costs by 95 to 97% by not helping 95 to 97% of the students, and making it difficult for the students who do get helped to actually get the help. So even the people who get the help are frustrated because it's so hard. I actually had a friend of mine she runs a business. She's a woman, so she has a woman's own business. And there was federal funding and state funding to help support female-owned businesses. So she said, great, I'll apply for that. It was like 20 plus pages of forms to prove something, God only knows what. And she had to write an essay. Just all this, and it's just clear this is just ways of weeding people out. How do you're a woman, okay, I was, check my birth certificate. I have a business. Look, check my tax records. Like, how complicated should this be? Ooh, very, very complicated. And so what happens now is, so now then they say, oh, look, we're liberals. We're supporting students going to education. What they don't say is we've created a program to cut out 97% of the people who probably need help, and we'll just help these 3%. It's not the 3%'s fault, by the way. But by the way, this irritates everybody. even the students, the few people who get the grants, are irritated because this is frustrating to have to go through all this work and do all this extra stuff to maybe get money you don't know, and then you get it and you're happy, but still like, oh, that was stressful and difficult. And then the 90+% who aren't even eligible sit there and go, well, why did those few people over there, why am I having to pay full this very expensive thing and take out extra student loans just to do the same thing? Like, this doesn't seem like a very fair deal. And it turns out it's not a very fair deal, actually. This is specifically not a fair deal. And so then there's all this argument about whether, notice the argument does not occur on the lines of whether there should be everybody gets free education. That is not the argument. The argument is whether anybody should get any money for education. And the quote-unquote Democrat, the liberal side, is to say, oh, we'll provide a little bit for a few people. And the Republican side is you shouldn't provide any for any. Right? That's the spectrum. This is the spectrum of debate in the United States. And just so that, I don't want to, again, belabor this too much, but I think you're seeing the outline. But so it was really, this came into focus for me very directly during the last presidential election, because Kamala Harris came out with her, because housing costs in the United States, as in many places, are really a big issue. And it's a big social issue. There's no doubt about it. And her plan, which was incomprehensible. One, this lets you know that there's no clarity, right? When you can't describe something clearly, it means you don't understand what to do. You don't know how to deal with this. And you don't know how to deal with it because functionally you're supposed to be free market. And you can't come up with a public assistance program if you're free market. And so, again, when you're center right, it's hard to respond to. And so her plan had a couple elements, but the only one that really directly might help people was a $25,000 down payment assistance. So if you know what the cost of housing in the United States is, that is functionally nothing, but it was only for first-time home buyers who had consistently paid their rent on time for 2 years. So first-time home buyer, $25,000 if you're a good person functionally. So if you've missed a rental payment or two, okay, you're out. If you've owned a home in the past for some reason and now you're trying to get back in the housing market, okay, you're out. We're not going to. So again, you can just see this careful, shaving, like just shave it off. And so maybe that way not so many people apply and it's not so expensive, and it turns out that it's not that helpful. So you're like, okay, functionally, you just didn't provide that much help. So what you have in the United States then, and a lot of the debate about woke stuff and all this, is this kabuki theater debate about programs, incentives, ideas that really have no core there. And what it exposes when compared to the kind of political spectrum that you encounter in Europe and other countries, by the way, not just Europe, Central and Latin America, is that there is functionally there's no left wing. It just, there isn't there. And so when trying to explain to Europeans, like they're like, oh, the Democrats are a left-wing party. And it's like, well, they're not really a left-wing party because they don't do any of the things that you would expect a left-wing party to do. And then what the Democrats end up arguing in the United States is, well, these people over here are even worse, which is actually what a lot of center-right parties do functionally in Europe now, is they stand there and they say, yeah, we're center-right, but we're not crazy right. Which, okay, whatever the merits of that are, again, that's not the same as being left. Like in France, you have communists here, which is like communist, like Stalin communists, they just don't believe in private property. We're like, wow, that's crazy, but they get some votes. Let me tell you, it's like, wow, they're the crazy communists get some votes. Okay, so they've definitely got that far left. They got that left that's so left that it might just be right kind of left, right? And then you have other left-wing programs. And so the viability, who's better, which of these programs should be pursued, whatever, like knock yourselves out. But to understand that the debate and much of the discussion in the United States masks the notion that our parties, which are in some ways different, in a lot of ways aren't that different, and as a political spectrum, they are just way, way, way to the right for any standard sort of election multi-party system. And so this makes it confusing and hard for us to understand how you end up someplace like where we are today with the American administration, because it just seems like, where did that come from? Oh, it came from the right wing, the really right wing, because there is, it's either the right or the right. Like, these are your choices. And then when you get the really right, like, oh, that's maybe righter than even we wanted. It's like, oh, okay, that's part of the problem. There is not a real functioning, fully voiced opposition or viable counteroffer to this. It's either just, nothing, like the student loan program, like, oh, okay, let's eliminate student loans. Like, okay, so people can't afford to go to college. This is the debate. Like, if you can't afford to go to college, too bad for you. Okay. Or this horrible, like, quote unquote, market-based system, supported by the government, of course. So anyway, a brief reflection that I hope might clarify some things, maybe even for people in the United States, but I think importantly for people in Europe and other parts of the world that may not really understand the crazy, just how crazy the American political scene and system are, and how this underlies the range of our parties, underlies the present situation that we find ourselves in the world today. Thank you very much.